today's quest, world-renowned sculptor Timothy Schmalz. Life is a quest for logic and reason. It is a quest to find balance between science and faith. Life is a quest for knowledge and understanding. But most importantly, it's a quest for personal discovery. Whatever your quest, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Welcome to Quest. Hello everyone, I'm your host, Todd Fischer, and this is Quest. For those of you that might be new listeners, let me tell you a little about me. I'm the founder of Metacortex and the author of the best-selling book, Metacortex, The Grand Design. I'm a philosopher, a theorist, a metaphysicist. I'm a perpetual pupil of theology, and I'm an expert in comparative religious study. I've also extensively researched the mind-body connection, anatomy, and physiology. I documented over 300 case studies while researching my book, all from a scientific perspective, with cases that ranged from near-death and out-of-body experiences to possession to past life experiences, as well as the metaphysical, the paranormal, and other unexplained cases of a spiritual nature. This podcast will bring you some of those astonishing stories, and in some cases by the people that actually lived them. From time to time, I'll be talking about important, perhaps even controversial issues from both spiritual and scientific points of view. The world we live in is ever-changing, and there's often a conflict between spirituality and science. And I wanted to bring you this podcast to balance that equation. It will show you how we know what we know, and there's still so much we don't know. For me, curiosity is part of what makes us human. It's the joy of discovery. It's what drives us. It's our quest. Today on Quest, I have Timothy Schmalz, a Canadian sculptor based out of Toronto, Canada. He focuses on religious sculptures. His work is showcased at hundreds of churches around the world, including impressive pieces at the Vatican. Tim is an interesting guy. I think you'll really enjoy this interview. Hi, Tim. Welcome to the Quest podcast.
Hi, I'm glad to take a break from sculpting to talk to you.
I'm excited to have you on the podcast. I've been for a day and a half now, I've been like really just browsing the internet for all of your incredible pieces and looking at where they're at, and it's really exciting to have you here. I've had artists on the podcast before, but I've never had a sculptor. So this is really cool for me, and in particular a sculptor who has worked on just so many important things, particularly leaning toward religious sculpts, which I find really interesting. So I wanted to have you kind of just, tell my listeners, where you're at and kind of how you got started in this. When did you know you were into art, and particular sculpture?
Well, I'm 50 years old right now, and I've been sculpting actually ever since I was 19, obsessively. And so I like to think that I've accelerated more than just 30 years of sculpture because of my devotion to it. But yeah, I was drawn to doing sculpture obviously at a very early age, and there was something that I just loved about the tactile nature of it. The sense of creation is really awesome. Like you take something that didn't exist, you take some material and you form something new out of it. And so it was mesmerizing to me really at an early age, ever since I was 16, the idea of art. And then probably when I was 16, I did my first sculpture, and I was just amazed at what the potential was with sculpture. And it just seemed to at that early age unfold so many surprises and so much excitement that I continued to basically do it throughout school, I went to Ontario College of Art in Canada. And then I actually dropped out after 3 months, and I got my own studio and started working. And that's when I was around, I think I dropped out when I was 19 years old, and I haven't been doing anything but sculpture ever since. So that's a serious amount of time.
Absolutely. So for listeners and for me, because I don't know much about this, so tell me about how the process works. What do you work with in particular? What's your process? How does a sculpture develop? Does it start with like sketches on paper? Is it a block of clay as a model? What happens before you get to the final full-size sculpt?
Well, I think first of all, with sculpture, the first thing you need is an awesome, compelling subject matter. And if you don't have that, you're not motivated. You won't get very far. And so I think the first thing is to have an amazing idea thrown at you or rise out from your experiences, and then it's how to execute that. I often like saying that artwork and sculpture is just the skin that surrounds an awesome idea, and depending on how cool that idea is, it'll depend on how excellent your sculpture is, right? And so once you have the great idea, the motivation will be there to do it because it's a great idea that warrants to come into existence. And then essentially what it will be doing is it will be coming to my studio here and start sculpting with clay. Now, I don't know, are you going to have video to this, or is it just us talking for your...
Just audio. Just audio.
Okay. So around me here, I'll have to describe, are huge buckets of clay in my massive studio here in Canada. And these clay buckets get emptied out as I create a sculpture, because I put actually huge amounts of clay to build up a form, almost like the opposite of carving. And then when I get it to a certain point, then that's where I take off some, I add some, I take off some, I add some. And this process goes on for months. Sometimes it even goes on for more than a year until the sculpture looks perfect. Then what I do is I make a mold of it. And what that is, well, I don't know what type of thing I could explain to someone who's never seen a mold. But it's a shell that you basically apply onto the sculpture. You pull off the shell, you pour bronze in that shell, and then you have a bronze sculpture of exactly what you did in clay, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the abbreviated version of the process about creating a sculpture.
Sure.
You don't need to know any more details than that.
No,
It gets pretty technical quick.
No, it's fine. Those are the great broad strokes I wanted to kind of hear about it. What happens to the original clay work itself? Does that deteriorate over time? Does it break down when it's molded? What happens to those?
The clay gets, I just put it back in a bucket, add some water, reuse it for another sculpture. So it's the clay's just to create the sculpture, which will be made a mold of and then cast in bronze, right?
Sure, sure.
One thing that I've learned over my years of doing sculpture is it takes a lot of time. And one of the things that you have to be as a sculptor is have zero value for your own time. Once you start getting concerned about your time, you're screwed. You're not going to do it, because it just takes so long to do every single sculpture. And if you count how much hours you put in and then you want to change something, well, then you're going to have to negotiate, well, how much time did I put on that? Now I'm changing it, right? Also, I believe that great ideas, they come almost randomly, in a sense. You don't know when you're going to create an amazing sculpture. But one thing that's obvious is it won't be created unless you're putting in the time doing it. I guess like with everything else, right? But I often like to think that there's an absolute masterpiece sculpture 50 sculptures from now. And then as soon as I've done the 49th or whatever, then that one will come. So it's almost like you got to muscle through on just taking, sacrificing a lot of time to do the sculptures. And I've been, like I mentioned, I've been sculpting ever since I was 20 years old professionally, obsessively. And what I'm fascinated with is at the age of 50, I can still get excited, and I still know that there's some amazing sculptures out there. But a lot of this is just because most of the work I do is Christian. 95% of it. If I didn't work with Christianity, there's no way I would have the spiritual stamina to actually continue. And so, yeah.
When did you get into doing spiritual sculpts? When did that come on?
I started getting into doing spiritual sculpts when I went through a midlife crisis and I dropped out of school. I dropped out of the best art school in Canada. I was 3 months prior, I was so exhilarated because I got into school. Midway through it, I realized that this is not what I want to do the rest of my life. There's a lot of bullshit. And I was surrounded by a secular idea on what artwork was that was pretty much void of the artwork that I loved when I was a teenager, Michelangelo, Da Vinci, all the great masters. It became, what I realized quick was it became a game. And it became a game of the first person to touch the creative radical shock button wins, and he wins everything. And if you touch that radical shock art button first, you get the prize, and everyone else loses. And I began to think, this is not valuable other than in this little incestual world called the art world. And I began to be very, very kind of confident in my idea that it was bullshit. I remember I used to go to these art galleries when I was a art student in Toronto, and I'd go in them and I would reverently walk up to each abstract painting, whether it was just one color like a monochromatic painting, or it looked like someone vomited, or if it looked like a 3-year-old child didn't. But I would reverently give this certain amount of time where I would look at the painting, and then I would move on to the next, and then move on to the next. And there was a changing point where I walked into a gallery, and it was a bunch of abstract bullshit artwork, and I just marched through it and I left, and I thought, I don't really care. And I thought, yeah, that's about it. And that's the shift of me, because I began to think that this was all shock, and there was nothing really substantial underneath it, right?
Yeah.
And then I thought, do I want to spend the rest of my life doing this? And I had some experience of myself, because I was doing abstract artwork when I was in my teens, and I did this one abstract thing I thought was absolutely fantastic. It was a Jackson Pollock paint by number. I'm not going to describe it, but it was a bullshit artwork, right? And I thought it was a masterpiece. No one has ever done this before. Oh no, someone showed me. Andy Warhol did it in the 1960s. Well, I thought, oh, well, what a waste of time. I'll have to repurpose the materials. And I thought, that's it, isn't it? It's useless now. I'm going to have to destroy it because it was done before. And I thought, here I am at art school, and I wanted that grounding. I wanted to sculpt a hand, and then move from a hand to move on to a more complex idea. I wanted to do something that was meaningful with my life at the age of like 19 when I was there. And then so basically I quit art school, and I started to kind of invent my own school, and that was using as my role models the artists like Michelangelo, Da Vinci, etc., right? Bernini. One of the fascinating things about Michelangelo, he was a hardcore Christian. He was hardcore. He was absolutely Catholic, seriously. And what I find fascinating is none of the art schools are teaching that. None of the art schools, you know, they'll look at the Pieta or something like that, and they'll talk about the forms, the lines, and everything, but they won't talk about the motivation or what's being represented. They're just talking about the skin, so to speak. And that's when I began to realize that in order to have a great piece of artwork, you need a great philosophy, theology behind it, so that the artwork just becomes the skin around it. So I began to pursue and investigate and study and get very much involved in ideas of spirituality, because if I understood the spirituality, that's the first part of the creation. That's more important than the clay, is the spirituality, and then the rest will follow. The rest is easy, right?
Right. So you didn't grow up with any kind of religion or spirituality when you were a child. This came on later in your life.
I like to call myself in a very well-adjusted secular Christian household, secular Catholic. I was baptized Catholic, but I wasn't forced at all about religion. Zero. And I think that and it was me at the age of 17 that had a conversion experience, where then I completely identified myself as a Christian and a Catholic. And at that point in time, because I was robbed of a lot of that growing up at a Catholic school and everything like that, I was seeing things as a convert that had a fascination and an awe for everything. It wasn't like, you know, this is what we do at our kitchen table, this is sliced bread, this is our prayer. It was like, oh, wow, this is very exciting and this is new. And I do believe that was an advantage for me at that early age, because I didn't bring on any negative connotation. I didn't bring on any connotation. I read Plato's Republic before I was reading the lives of the saints. And so in a sense, I brought this more mature perspective on it. And I've known Catholics and Christians that they grew up and it was, you know, it was their staple, and it turned out horribly. And I really think about, and here I am getting in conversations with people that are so damaged by how it was presented to them growing up. And so I think, oh, thank God I didn't have that background, because I would never have perhaps saw how special and wonderful it is, right?
It's interesting to me what you just described, because it exactly parallels my own experience growing up the exact same way. Like it's
really?
It's almost exactly as you said it. I would have explained my own way of growing up and finding my spirituality. So I think a lot of people are like that. I'm also the same age as you too, so we kind of grew up in the exact same time frame.
Oh, excellent.
So I'm also 50. So you describe your sculptures as being visual prayers. Elaborate on that a little bit for me, what that means.
Well, I think about that quite often right now, visual prayers. And I think, and this is something that has become stronger over the years that I've been sculpting. Just like I think that Christianity in general has a very bad PR.
They do have a PR problem. They do.
They do. You know, we're attacking as Christians. We're being bombarded by a very sophisticated media, right? But I do believe that the presentation of Christianity is not as good as it could be, right? And one of the things I think about is how we, and let me just say this, and I'm not the first person to say it, but we have a very, very compartmentalized, I don't know if that's a word, we like to put our faith within a little box. And you know, we got this rich history, you know, and amazing traditions, but sometimes they can act as something that is negative in a sense, where it becomes stifling in a sense. We have this perception of prayer, that prayer has to be something that's very passive, right?
Right.
And I don't necessarily believe that. I like to broaden the idea of prayer to be huge. And I think we're good if we do that. Like, we're benefiting if we do that. So instead of saying that prayer is when you clasp your hands together or if you say a rosary, why can't prayer be when I'm actually sculpting? Why can't the rosary beads be my pieces of clay that I put on a sculpture? Why can't I create my whole studio to be like a chapel here? And so what I started to do is, most of the time when I sculpt, the last 4 years, I kid you not, 4 years, for at least 8 hours a day, I would be listening to the New Testament as I sculpted. And I thought, why do the moment we consider other things sacred in our life than just our conventional rituals, we can open ourselves up to a lot more of God within our day-to-day life, right? Why can't a factory worker that has a repetitious job say, this is my prayer, this is my prayer machine, and every time he or she is putting this on that, say a prayer, right?
Yeah.
And so I've really, throughout the 30 years, and believe me, these are long days over those 30 years, thought a lot about the idea of prayer and how I can kind of blur the lines between my non-religious and my religious ideas, right? And I think that, we're used to talking about prayers as something that's recited, something that's text, right? Like, I think I'm challenging all this in my day-to-day life, because I haven't really picked up a Bible and read with my eyes in probably, other than just a passage from the internet, for more than a couple years. But I have my audio unabridged tapes playing every single day, right?
Yeah.
I say to people, I say, well, I read the Bible today. When I was reading the Bible, and they said, what do you mean reading the Bible? You were at your studio all day. Well, I said, the tapes. Well, that's not reading. Yes, it is, right? And just like praying, like if I do the most beautiful sculpture possible, and it's put in a very nice place, I think that's like a prayer, right?
Yeah.
I think when I did my St. Padre Pio, I was very conscious, and I do this with some of my sculptures, that each time I'm actually applying some clay, I will say a prayer, right? And so those are hours, right? And I thought, yeah, this is like a huge rosary bead in the shape of St. Padre Pio, accumulated by the adding of clay, right?
Right.
But so I kind of think that as far as I'm concerned, and hopefully this will apply to other people, that one benefits from bringing spiritual terms or identifying things as spiritual, as opposed to not. And so what I think about my sculptures, my best sculptures, are in a sense prayers, visual prayers, that every line has to, almost like a line from a prayer, has some meaning and have some value as far as bringing people closer to their spirituality, right? And I guess also that I'm the first taste tester. I see the sculptures first, and I'm kind of seeing them first, having a consideration that other people will see them. So I'm trying to make them, and I'm gauging my reaction, my emotional response to them, to compose them in a way that hopefully other people will feel the same as I do when they encounter them.
Right. Let's talk about one of your pieces right now. Let's talk about Homeless Jesus. How did this come about? What were you thinking about? Because what I think is interesting about the art world is it's always one of these one man's ceilings, another man's floor kind of thing, where one person loves it, other people might find it controversial. Homeless Jesus has a little controversy with it, and also people adore it and love it. Let's talk about the kind of the genesis of Homeless Jesus here.
The Homeless Jesus sculpture is by far one of the most exciting projects I ever created. The idea of the Homeless Jesus was basically a reaction to seeing a homeless person in one of the major city streets in Canada, which is Toronto. And I saw a homeless person completely shrouded in a blanket. It was a person. I don't know if it was a male or a female. It was a haunting figure, totally shrouded. And it was in the middle of the day. And I said to my mind when I saw that, when I had that encounter, I said to my mind, that's Jesus. And it couldn't escape me. I just kept on thinking about it for about a week. And then I thought, why don't I sculpt that experience? And then hopefully other people will see the sacred within the homeless people. So I started sculpting it, and to my amazement, it became almost a line for line translation of Matthew 25. You know, in Matthew 25, whenever you've helped the least of my brothers, you've helped me, right? But before he says that, there's that ambiguity, right? There's that mystery of who is this, and then finally it's identified as God. And so there's that moment where it's everyone, and then Jesus basically is everyone in that situation, right? Whenever you've helped the least of my brothers, you've done that to me, right? And so the fascinating thing with the homeless Jesus is being a life-size bronze sculpture of a sleeping figure that is totally shrouded except for the feet. One, when they first look at it, will think it's just a homeless person. And it's only till you get very close up to it that it's revealed that it's with the wounds on the feet of Jesus, or of the feet, that it is actually Jesus. So there is that moment where it looks like a real homeless person. A lot of places around the world, people have called the police, people have called the paramedics because they thought it was a real homeless person. They say to me, Tim, you are the best sculptor because your sculptures always are mistaken as real people. And I said, well, look, it's a sleeping person on a park bench. If it was a tennis player, that would be very difficult. But a sleeping person and a sculpture have one thing in common: they don't move. So I already have that going for me, right? But the whole unfolding of the sculpture, once you think it's no longer a real person, but then you realize it's a sculpture, only when you get really close up do you realize it's Jesus. In fact, on that sculpture, I put a little bit of a bench, an extra part of a bench, a space where one can sit. And that happened when I was actually sculpting it in the clay, because I thought, as I was sculpting, I was sitting right beside, and I thought, this is the closest I've ever got to a homeless person sitting down. And I thought, well, I gotta make this experience for everyone that comes into contact with this sculpture. And that space is amazing, because it's just enough for one person to sit. When I was actually in Washington, D.C., when Pope Francis visited, and one of the television stations was interviewing me at the site of the sculpture, and a big homeless black dude came up, and he saw what we were doing. He said, "What are you guys doing here?" Right? And camera crews and everything, right? Yeah. And then so I introduced myself as a sculptor, and he said, "This is our sculpture. This is my place." And he specifically said, "My place where we can sit and zone with Jesus," right? And he was so happy. He was so enthralled. And he told me that this is our sculpture for the homeless here in Washington, D.C., right? What an impact that made on me. What an impact that sculpture has made on so many people around the world. Actually, right now, there's one being shipped to Bogota, Colombia. And it's going on a mountain overlooking Bogota, where there's a chapel, a church on this very popular site in the city, that people climb up to the top and can see the beautiful, busy city of Bogota, and there the homeless Jesus is going to permanently be installed. I just installed it at the Metropolitan Cathedral in Mexico City, facing the Inca ruins off from its position on cathedral property. And it's just awesome, the sculpture.
That's incredible. Let's talk about your St. Peter's Square project.
My St. Peter's Square project, that you're referring to the Angels Unaware sculpture.
Yes.
Yeah, that is a fascinating project, and almost to the actually September last year, September 29th, it was unveiled, and with my Matthew 25 homeless Jesus and many of the other sculptures I did on that subject matter. Matthew 25, after I did the homeless Jesus, I thought this is one of my favorite parts of the Bible. It warrants more than just one sculpture. So I took divisions of it, like when I was in prison, when I was naked, and I did kind of more sculptures to describe Matthew 25. And all these sculptures, in fact, are installed in some of the most historical places in Rome. And so through those other pieces that I did and through my visits to Rome, a lot of people became aware of my sculptures. And so I was actually requested to actually work on a new project on the theme of migrants and refugees. And, it's interesting because migrants and refugees. So I go back to my I leave Rome, I come back to my Canadian studio. I'm sitting on my studio chair and bang, it happens. Angels unawares, Hebrews 13. 2, be welcoming to strangers. Many have entertained angels unawares. Listen, I told you I listened to the Bible nonstop, right? About a year prior to this, like I think two or 3 years ago, like it was almost like the first time I heard Hebrews 13:2, be welcoming to strangers. Many have entertained angels unawares. I dropped my sculpting tool. I ran inside my house and I searched angels unawares art. I oftentimes do that to see what other artists have done stuff on certain projects. I don't want to recreate the wheel, right? So, my God, no one has ever done a sculpture of angels unawares, be welcoming to strangers, right? I only saw it on coffee cups and t-shirts. But when I came back from Rome, I was blown away because the idea just completely unfolded to me. And that was migrants, refugees from all historical periods of time, all different places in the world, all together on a raft or a boat. And in the center of this boat or raft is an angel. And because of the crowd, you can only see the wings peering out from the top. And so then it's like the angel wings belong to them all, right? And I thought, oh my God, this is just amazing concept, right? So I started to work on it, and I thought, yes, that's the only way I can really show the idea about migration and refugees and immigrants to the best of my abilities. So what if it requires more than 100 different figures? I'm up for it, right? So I started sculpting a model, and I did the model that was like, about 2 feet or so, like the model I showed you earlier. Sure. And then I sent the picture of it to the Vatican, and I get an email back, and I was very excited because I wasn't even done the model, and I got an email back suggesting that Pope Francis would be delighted if I bring the model down to St. Peter's Square so he can bless it. Oh my God, this is so exciting. So I finished the model, and then there was talks about the ideal, and that is the life-size version to be created. And so I got another, and this must be one of the most exciting emails ever for anyone. It was decided that the sculpture would be installed in St. Peter's Square, the 20-foot version of it. So then I started creating it, and it is a sculpture park within one sculpture. It's 20 feet. It has 140 different figures, migrants, refugees in it. The same number of figures that are on the colonnade that Bernini carved that surround St. Peter's Square. And what is very exciting about this sculpture is it is a visual welcoming in St. Peter's Square. It's an artistic welcome. And I oftentimes think about that. And I actually, when the first time I went to Rome was when I was in my early 20s. And I thought there's one element that the sculptors and the artists never wanted and never occurred to them when they did their sculptures in Rome. And that is that the Roman Catholic Church is old. it's antiquated. And that's rectified with this new sculpture being placed there. It's horrible when people go into to Rome and they go into some of these great basilicas and churches and cathedrals, and they think they're walking into a museum, right? By adding this new piece there, it's making that message, that really powerful message that the church is living, and it's growing, and it's not a museum, right? And so that's why I'm so excited about that. But after the installation of the piece, it's fascinating because St. Peter's Square is a place where people from all over the world go. When Bernini designed the colonnade, he designed it for pilgrims, but he designed it for tourists as well, because even in the 1600s, it was St. Peter's was a hotspot. Rome was a tourist center, right? And so they were very conscious that there are a lot of people coming by, and so the sculpture is kind of a visual welcoming. It's a visual artistic welcoming. And when I was there, I'd see Chinese, I would see Africans, I would see Sikhs, and with one sculpture, they're all in there. And so it's in a sense, it's a really nice idea. For that as to be added to St. Peter's Square. Yeah.
And you met Pope Francis too, right?
Yes, and I met him at the dedication of the piece, and I met him previously. He blessed my homeless Jesus model a couple years prior. The homeless Jesus is now in the Vatican, and it's in Rome, 2 different countries.
Yeah.
When I first created the model for the homeless Jesus, Pope Francis blessed it. He said it's an excellent, beautiful representation of Jesus, which was awesome for him to say. And then after the unveiling of the piece, it was just brilliant. I feel like so much like I am fulfilling a purpose and a function with this piece. What is that function? To give artistic expression to what is so dear and close to Pope Francis, and that is we are all sacred, right? And we have to take care of one another. And that piece, I nailed it. It took like a long time to do, as you can imagine, and the expressions in it. If I would just have like 3 people, the African, the European, and say the Chinese, it would become a cliche, right? And then with the angel, it would just become it would become too forced, right? Believe it or not, the message is so subtle and so discreet. And it only became discreet and subtle because it's 20 feet and because there's 140 different figures in it. It's not a cliche. Nothing, there's a Jew at the front, but then there's 3 more Jews within the piece, right? Even now, I'm thinking, how many Sikhs did I put in? 4. It didn't seem forced. It does not seem like a forced metaphor. And some people, sure, they will see it, and they will be able to not only understand how everyone every group of people have been migrants at one time, but also they'll get an understanding of the emotions that some of these people had. They're not all crying. A lot of them are hopeful. A lot of them are going to build a new world, a new life, contribute, make things, right? And a lot of them are sad because they're leaving at home. A lot of them are totally devastated. So it's not a cliche. It's a deep study of what humanity has done in history, and also the emotion that's attached to it, and also the angels in the center. So it's spiritually central. You know what I mean? It's just grounded with that spirituality, but it's not in your face, so to speak.
Let's talk about the Last Supper sculpture.
The Last Supper sculpture is exactly how I think Catholic sculpture has to go, or Christian sculpture, right? The Last Supper sculpture is a piece I did, I think, again, I was in my 20s. I thought, oh man, I grew up, Da Vinci's Last Supper. Last Supper is like a staple in Christian artwork, right? And I thought, when am I going to do my Last Supper? And I said, now, Tim. And so I just started working on it. And I really it was a spontaneous movement. And because I don't count the hours I put in a day, I can always throw in a new sculpture, right? And so I started to work on this. And it was actually only after I committed that I'm going to do a Last Supper, I thought, yes, and this one is going to have Jesus at the table and 12 empty seats.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's it. And it's not because the 12 apostles would have been a lot of work. Nope. It's not because of that. It's because I wanted to make a powerful statement. I wanted to make the statement that we have to become the apostles of Christ today. Right. And our religion is not something that we passively look at. Our religion, our faith is something we have to get involved with. And it is not an ornament, right? So I cannot tell you how many velvet paintings of the Last Supper, how many small little statues of the Last Supper there are, but check out how the table is. It's the same as mine. I have that horizontal long table, Jesus in the center, right? So I'm already playing on how people are used to seeing the Last Supper with that format. And in the 12 empty seats, it slaps you just because people are so used to seeing Last Suppers, and here you have 12 empty seats. When no one's sitting around it, it's a forlorn beckoning to get involved because Jesus needs you, right? When it's filled with kids and people or just a guy hanging out with, it makes another statement. That just like the homeless Jesus, just like the angels unawares, we are sacred people. We all have the potential to be great saints, right?
You had the Last Supper installed in churches all over the country, and people actually sit on those stools and they sit around that table. It's like really incredible to see.
Yeah, I think artwork right now, Catholic artwork has to sing for its supper, meaning that it has to work hard for people to see it, right? And I think that today we are bombarded by media, we're bombarded by people's time. The famous quote, I forget what philosopher said it, when you buy someone a book, you also think you bought them the time to read it, right? And likewise with Christianity, there's so many gifts out there, there's so many treasures, but we can't just hand over a book of St. Thomas or actually St. Augustine's The Confessions to someone and say, here, read it, right? It's hard to do in today's time because people don't have the time, right? But with artwork, if I can create artwork that makes people look, I'm doing something, right? It makes them inspired to read the Confessions or to investigate spirituality, then that artwork is doing something. But artwork today, I think Christian artwork especially, has to really work hard, and it can't be lazy. It can't be ornamental. It has to really, really be powerful, because that's the only way people will see it. Otherwise, it's just invisible, right?
Right. What do you have coming up in Washington, D.C. on September 27th?
Washington, D.C., it's a very exciting time because just like the homeless Jesus, the Vatican suggested that they would be delighted if more than just the one angels unawares existed in the world. So select countries are going to have identical casts of the piece that's in St. Peter's Square permanently installed. United States of America is getting and receiving the second bronze cast of the angels unawares, the exact replica of the one in St. Peter's Square. It's very exciting. It's going to Washington. It's going to be installed in Washington, D.C. The Catholic University of America has given land to create a park for the angels unawares in America, and it is just going to be stunning. So the unveiling is happening September the 27th, and then the sculpture will be a part of America. Now, you know, it's fascinating because this time right now in America, you have so much unrest, and you actually have the timing is insane because you actually have people destroying sculptures in your country.
Yeah.
And here is one of the biggest sculptures in America, bronze sculptures in America, new sculptures, going to be installed right in the center of this turmoil and this strife. And I think it's God's will that this is just not a coincidence. I do believe that the message of the angels unawares symbolically is going to help the nation heal. And why do I believe that? Actually, I just heard, what was it? A week ago, Martin Luther King Jr.'s quote. He said, and I think he said this when he was at the National Mall, very close to where the sculpture is going to be installed. We all came from different ships, but we're all on the same boat today. And
Yeah.
I think about all the sculptures that people are destroying, and then I think about this sculpture where you have all of humanity all together on a raft, on a ship, and with angel wings in the center. And I think that I do believe that this is the new Statue of Liberty. I do believe that our problems in the world and in our nations, I'm saying us because I'm Canadian, I do believe that this problem of division has to be solved with spirituality and no other way. Martin Luther King Jr., when he said that we all came from different ships, but we're on the same boat now, it was a man that loved humanity, black, white, whatever, right? And I think that one thing that's seriously missing within these movements that are happening is love and compassion for all of humanity. And I think that this is a symbol that, inspired by the beliefs of Pope Francis, to be placed in the center at the nation's capital is not just coincidental. I think it's providential. And I do believe it's time for us to have a new Statue of Liberty. And I do believe that this is that sculpture.
Wow. That's a beautiful way to wrap up the podcast. And I don't think we can top that. I love it. Like, it's exciting what's happening, and you're incredibly talented, gifted. I think you have a gift from God to do all this. It's really brilliant.
Well, thanks. And I consider it a big responsibility. I know that a lot of my sculptures are out there, but I also know that Christianity is the endless well of creativity. And so I'm up to, God willing, making more beautiful pieces in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, keep up the good work. And I'm sure we'll cross paths at some point. I appreciate you being on the show. How can people find you out there on the interwebs? Are you on social media? Do you have a website?
Yeah.
How can people find you?
I'll give you my Facebook link, but you can Google me on Facebook, Timothy Schmalz Facebook. I usually post the new pieces I'm doing there. It's quicker than anywhere else, right?
Gotcha. Perfect. Well, thanks for coming out today.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Todd.
Yeah, we'll talk soon.
Excellent. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
There you have it. My interview with Timothy Schmalz. How cool is that he's met the Pope? Tim views himself as an evangelist who preaches worldwide, although not with his mouth, but with his hands. That may be true, but what is definitely true is that he is one of the single greatest sculptors living in our time today. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. I'll see you next week on Quest. Thank you for listening to Quest. Please be sure and rate and review this podcast. This podcast is copyright. Any previously trademarked or copyright content is used by permission. Be sure to visit the official website for the International Association of Metatomics at metatomics.org, or find us on social media for other unique content. And make sure to pick up a copy of the book that started a spiritual revolution, Metatomics, The Grand Design, available for sale online and at most major bookstores. Thanks for listening.